people continue to join and share where they're coming from, I'm going to get us started. So hi, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Molly Lord, and I am a member of the team here at Scrum Alliance. And I want to thank you guys all for joining us from across the globe for today's webinar, a deep dive into the Agile Skills Report. So this year, Scrum Alliance was really excited to partner with the Business Agility Institute to really look at the impact of Agile skills on the workplace. And today, we are going to have one of the experts explore and give us a better understanding of those findings from that report. A few items before we get started. All of our webinar participants are in listen-only mode, which means that your best bets of communicating with us are via the chat and via the Q&A box. So please submit your questions for Evan and Laura and myself into the Q&A box so that we can easily answer them towards the end of the webinar. We'll have about 15 to 20 minutes to answer any question. And if there are more than we can answer, we'll figure out some way to follow up and get all of your questions answered. This webinar is being recorded, so after a few days, it will be available for rewatching on the Scrum Alliance website, and we will be emailing all of you with a link to the recording once it is ready. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm excited to introduce Evan Laybourne, who is the head of thought leadership and advocacy with the Business Agility Institute. Evan, take it away.
Thank you so much, Molly, and good morning to everybody. And I say morning because I am speaking to you from Melbourne, Australia, land of fantastic coffee, but terrible weather, where it also happens to be 5 a.m. in the morning. So I suspect I'm the only Australian on this call at this point. For the next hour, we're going to explore what it means for Agilists and for Agile organizations to recruit, to hire, to bring in people with the skills necessary to be successful in the new world of work. And we're going to take it from both perspectives, not just the organizations who are recruiting and those who are hiring, but also what it means for you and your careers. Now, we're going to be covering off a lot of data, a lot of information, and I do want to recognize that individual experiences are often different to global trends. And so one of the things we'd like to make sure we have is the space and the time to be able to recognize and discuss that throughout the session. So as Molly mentioned, if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A, which for those of you who are unfamiliar with Zoom, there should be a button at the bottom of the Zoom window saying Q&A, which if you click, you can type in the questions. Alternatively, please do so please enter any comments or thoughts or questions into the chat, and we will try and capture that throughout the session. We'll make sure there's about 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A, but again, let's see what we can do throughout the session as well. So please ask your questions throughout. Don't just hold on to them at the end. So what are we talking about? Last year, I'm already somehow in 2024. Earlier this year, it's still 2023. Earlier this year, the Scrum Alliance and the Business Agility Institute collaborated on a study on skills in the new world of work. Now, let me very quickly share my screen. There we go. So, skills in the new world of work. The intention was to understand what it means for like I said at the beginning, individuals and organizations. What is it that companies are truly looking for? What are they recruiting for? What are the agile skills that are in demand or perhaps not in demand? And conversely, we want to see what are the shifts in the trends and what is the overarching sentiment towards agility and for people who are recruiting and hiring in that space. You can download the report from the Scrum Alliance website. Please, there's a QR code, there's a link, and if you scroll back through the chat a couple of minutes ago, their link was also in the chat as well. So if you haven't read the report, please, thank you, Molly. If you haven't read the report, please take a few moments to grab that link, download the report, and well, follow along as we talk. Now, why is that not? There we go. What I want to start with is some of the context. Now, for those who don't know, the Business Agility Institute, we are a global membership and advocacy organization focusing primarily on research and publications. So I have to start with some very, think of this as the fine print of the study. So there is a data bias that we have to recognize. The participating organizations, those companies and those individuals that shared their insights and for whom we looked at job descriptions and recruitment and listings over LinkedIn, were heavily skewed towards product and technology industries and product and technology companies. Those organizations which would be traditionally agile, as the case may be. I also want to note that in this, we identified that there were different classes of skills. We would group these under what we refer to as functional skills, which are sometimes called hard skills or mechanical skills or work skills. And these are the skills that relate to a practical output, a piece of work that gets generated, quite often very closely coupled with a job title or a job description. So a software developer, right, will have deep functional expertise in software development. The other form of skills that emerge quite regularly is what we would class as human skills, sometimes referred to as durable skills or soft skills. These were the complementary skills that were supportive and necessary for the creation of the delivery of work, the creation of value, but generally were not primary to the job function. So these would include things like communication skills or presentation skills. Now, there is some nuance in what is a human soft skill and what is a functional skill, but we were basing this on there's an industry standard called Sophia, the skills framework. And so we based a lot of what we were doing based on that skills framework. Now, one other note to make absolutely clear is that skill is not the same as role. And so whilst I mentioned, for example, a software developer, which is a role, will have skills in software development, they should and will have multiple other skills as well. And what we found, and what we'll talk about in some detail, is the distinction between what skills were expected in different kinds of roles. And there were some surprises as we were exploring, as we were looking at the data, in terms of what was being expected, what was being asked of people. And those surprises, well, let's actually talk a little bit about them. But first, I'd like to bring you all into the chat, because I'd like you to take 1 minute and just in the chat, write down for me what you think, which skills are most in demand in today's workforce. Sheena says communication. Jorge says organization, I assume. Communication is coming through a lot. Critical thinking, that came through a lot. Interpersonal skills. Definitely critical thinking, communication, relationship. Oh, I like relationship building. Absolutely. Data analytics, that came through quite regularly. Technical skills, systems thinking, people management. There are a lot of people on this webinar. It's hard to keep track of these as they go through, but this is good. A lot of the skills that you're writing down. Oh, I like that. Asking good questions. That is definitely a skill that I think people should learn, though I would also add listening. I've been in way too many way too many meetings where people are asking good questions, and sometimes you just need to listen. There you go, active listening. Aline, thank you so much. Learning negotiation. Oh, Brenda, very interesting. So that actually came up a few times, and there are some negotiation frameworks like the Thomas Kilmann, Thomas Kilmann something framework. I'm drawing a blank, doesn't matter. But there are some very interesting frameworks for negotiation and conflict resolution that I think are undervalued or underinvested in with a lot of organizations. So let me move on. Please feel free to add other thoughts into the chat as we go. But we're going to explore a little bit more about what were the skills. So let me give you the key takeaways. Number one, human skills, those such as communication or negotiation or conflict resolution, interpersonal skills. These were rated more important than the functional skills on average. That's not to say the functional skills were not important. They absolutely were. But the human skills were rated 34% more in demand than the functional skills. Now, that is not a surprise. We see these same trends and measures in a lot of other research around skills. For example, the publications coming out of the World Economic Forum. So, of no surprise, but it is good to see that. Second, organizations need individuals with multiple deep skill capabilities, not just one. This was a very key finding that came out through almost all of the organizations. And we'll talk about what that means and the movement away from T-shaped skills towards pie-shaped skills. I'm not going to go there just yet, but it was a really interesting shift in what was expected from employees and what individuals need to start focusing on in terms of their career path. Number three, agile acumen. The ability to work in an agile way was seen as a crucial skill and was the second most in-demand functional skill. Now, agile acumen is what we will class as a functional skill rather than a human skill because it's something practical. Communication is practical. Practical is the wrong word. It relates directly to the ways of working, how people operate. Now, this was very gratifying to see. The fact that these hundreds of organizations around the world were prioritizing and recruiting for this agile acumen. However, number four, demand for agile specialist roles, such as agile coaches, was low. And so this is where we need to be distinct between skill versus role. So the skill of coaching was still in demand. The skill of coaching was still expected and sought after in multiple job descriptions, just not as much as a dedicated role titled Agile Coach as we have seen in previous years. So, and then lastly, the key takeaway is that from a learning and from a career path perspective, a professional development perspective, education pathways, your learning pathways, your personal learning journey needs to shift to think about being skill-based rather than role-based. And that is an emerging trend, not just in the agile industry, but across multiple other industries. So let's go into a little bit into each of these points. But I'm really going to start with a look at the industry in general to begin with. Some of you will have seen those LinkedIn articles about Agile is dead. And to those, I say, rubbish. That is not true. Or for those Americans, garbage. Agile is not dead. Agile has won. Congratulations to Agile. Agile has now become a expected skill set and capability across tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of organizations around the world. Now, are organizations doing it well? Not always. But the expectation that organizations have is that, right, people are able to work in an agile way. This is actually something for us to be proud of. Now, and especially if we believe, which I do personally, that agile is a mindset, agile is a culture, it is the values and principles, more so than necessarily a specific set of tools and practices. And we talk about individuals' interactions over processes and tools. So this is actually a good thing in most cases. And of course, there are extremes and there are organizations that are definitely doing this quite badly. But on the whole, the expectation of in a product and a technology space is that we are going to work in some kind of agile way. Congratulations. This is really, really good. But what does this mean as an industry? And what does this mean for individuals' careers? It means, well, you know what? Let me give you a different story. Let me talk about the car. The evolution of the car is one of commoditization. We go from a product that was for experimenters and innovators, daredevils, people who are willing to put life and reputation at risk to try and experiment new things. Then we see it as a luxury. We see it as something that was could be afforded by a select few, that was rare, that was premium, that people would be spending very large amounts of money in order to achieve. And then it becomes a commodity, something that becomes available to anybody. Anyone who on reasonable salary should be able to afford, should they choose to buy a car. And this 20, 30, 40-year journey brought about a complete revolution in transportation, and for that matter, even city design. The commoditization of the car and the adoption of it by all and sundry around the world changed everything, sometimes for worse, but it definitely changed everything. The same is true somewhat of Agile. You can go out there today and you can buy a Toyota Corolla for about 20 grand, right? 15 grand. You can buy an Aston Martin for about 200 grand. For anyone here who is a lover of cars, I apologize for the words that are about to come out of my mouth, because these are functionally the same product. Right? They achieve the same purpose and the same outcome. One is 10 times more expensive than the other, but does that mean that is 10 times the functionality? No, it is not. They are functionally the same product. The intangible values that come from the person who wants to buy the Aston Martin is doing so for other intangible outcomes or choices, attributes of that vehicle. And the same is true in an agile world. In a commoditization, with the commoditization of agile, right? And I noticed someone say something like crossing the chasm in the chat. You're absolutely correct, right? With the commoditization of agile, people are still buying Aston Martins. That's a legitimate business model, but 100, 1,000 times more people are buying the Toyota Corollas. That's also a legitimate business model. And organizations are choosing what they want to purchase, what they want, what kind of agile and what skills, here we come, there's the link back to skills, what skills are needed in an agile organization within the budget and what they value. Someone mentioned, yes, Beatrix, both definitely pollute the environment. There was an earlier comment in the chat, someone mentioning bad agile has won. And I'm not going to get into a value judgment about whether organizations and how effective organizations are. What I will say is that expectations, organizations have reached a point, a lot of organizations, tens of thousands of organizations around the world have reached the point where they expect agility. And one of the contradictions is that because it has become so common, because it's become so prevalent, because you're able to buy a Corolla for 20 grand and you don't have to spend 200 grand for the same outcome, for the same product, right? We are seeing organizations shift in their priorities. They're not investing as much in a agile transformation because they now expect it. It's been 20 years. What do you mean we're not agile yet? Now, but just like the car, there are still organizations buying Aston Martins. There are still organizations spending a lot of money because they want the premium version of agility. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. They want the intangible and in some cases very tangible values that comes from having that deliberate investment. But we have to recognize that as an industry, both exist. The demand for both exist. And for those of you who are enablers, coaches, and consultants, you need to be mindful. Are you selling Aston Martins or are you selling Corollas? Both are legitimate business models. You just need to be very mindful as to what your clients are expecting, and it's changing. And for those of you who are professionals, those of you who are working inside organizations, those of you who are building a career in this space, are you an Aston Martin? Are you developing? The metaphor is breaking down here. I'm not saying you're a car, but you get my point. Are you going to be developing yourself, right? Down which path? What set of skills are you going to be bringing in that is going to match the demand for the organizations of today? So let's shift a little bit in terms of the three audiences who are on this call today. We have audiences here who are what I'm going to broadly call service firms. You are trainers, you are coaches. You are on this call, you are interested in agility because you sell agility. Now, I'm going to take the benefit of the doubt and assume that you are doing it in a good way, that you are sincere in your attempt and your willingness to help organizations be better, to be more agile in terms of values and principles, and not just agile in terms of rote verbatim, do the ceremonies, install Jira, and away we go. You are sincerely trying to make organizations and those teams within those organizations more engaged. You want people to be engaged. You want people to feel empowered and to have a level of autonomy. You want the systems within the organizations to enable that. And your job has been for 20 years to coach and support and to lead organizations towards this mindset and this mentality, as well as these operations. But what is changing here, one of the big things that is changing here, is what organizations are expecting. Because of the commoditization, there are tens of thousands of people, of service firms who are out there who are trying to sell the same, I'm going to use that word in inverted commas, the same service. Now, This is where the distinction between, are you selling Aston Martins or are you selling Corollas? Right? And let me just go back a little bit in time. Those of you who are trainers, right? 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you could sell a CSM for $2,000, right? 2,000, even sometimes $3,000. Today, you can't. There are too many people selling introductory level Agile classes. Now, interestingly, when I gave this presentation at the Scrum gathering in Amsterdam 2 months ago, I had dinner with some people after the event, and someone said, well, I'm still charging €2,000 for my CSN. I'm like, brilliant, fantastic, how? And it turned out that he was the only person who was training CSMs in his language. And it's like, brilliant. You're selling the Aston Martin. You have an intangible value, an intangible quantum, something that is new that you provide that nobody else does. In this case, a language. But, and the conversation continues, like, if you were to expand outside your country and sell it in English, could you charge the same rate? He's like, no, definitely not. Right? So we've seen this, but like 10 years ago with the pricing differential in education and training. The same is now happening, or has been happening, with coaches and other Agile service professionals, those enablers, right, who are helping organizations to be better. There is the supply and demand mix is, well, actually, it's actually in flux right now, partly because organizations are shifting what their expectations of their demands are. So you need to be very mindful around what it is that you're selling. Now, I'm noticing that there are comments in the chat around the expectations of companies, that companies may not necessarily be asking for the right things, that they might be happy with substandard products and services because they're going for cheap, right? And you're absolutely right. But here's the thing. The market demands, or the market expects what the market expects. Right? There are going to be companies who aren't buying a $20,000 Corolla. They want to buy a $5,000 Russian thing that is going to break very quickly. Right? They want the cheapest. They really don't care. Now, I'm not talking about those organizations that don't care, those organizations that want substandard offerings. That's not who I'm talking about. Right? The Corolla and the Aston Martin are still both good, high quality products. Right? They're going to serve you for quite a number of years. Right? I'm not talking about those organizations who are looking for those substandard outcomes. That is bad Agile. Now, I will also, just to amplify on that, sometimes an organization doesn't know what good Agile looks like. And that, I think, is sometimes, as an industry, our mistake, right? There is little that we have done as an industry to help business people understand the distinction. We've helped technology people understand the distinction. And I think most technologists and most technology leaders recognize what good and bad looks like. But the person who's signing the check, right, she or he doesn't necessarily understand the distinction between the two offerings. Right? One that's 40% cheaper, it's like, well, they have the same certifications, they're selling the same thing, let's just go for the cheaper one. Right? So there is an issue here of knowledge and understanding, right? But that's partly an industry issue, which I don't have time to get into. That's an entirely different conversation, because we're talking here, we're trying to get into skills. For organizations, there is a shift, and it means new options and greater opportunities. For those of you in this webinar who are representatives of your companies, you're the ones hiring people. Right? There is a shift in terms of agility as a skill. and agile roles like coaches and so forth. The shift that is happening is your expectation is becoming, you want everyone to be agile. I don't mean do agile, I mean be agile. You're expecting these agile related skills to be present in every job description. And this is a shift in what people are hiring for, and it becomes actually a differentiation factor where individuals that say I'm a software developer or I'm an accountant, I can differentiate myself from others in my job domain, in my primary job domain, with these multiple complementary skill sets, one of which being that agile acumen. And so this is really where the shift is happening in terms of skills and the demands for skills. And then lastly, for those of you in this webinar who are agile professionals, who are individuals, like I said with the organizations, these agile related skills and experience has become it is not necessarily sufficient. Fewer organizations are recruiting these agile specialists, and they're looking for agility to be a part of each and every role. Now, this, from a career path perspective, opens up new pathways for you. Your ability to bring agility into almost any corner of the business is your strength. And that's where, from a career path and a professional development and education standpoint, what you should be aiming to do, what you should be looking to do. Now, just looking at time, there we go. So let me talk about two other key things, and then we're going to go into some further questions. Oops, sorry. Helps if I go into the right window. I want to talk about for a moment the importance of and, because this was another key finding that emerged over and over again in what organizations were looking for. So very traditionally, the conventional advice is we want T-shaped skills. We want to develop T-shaped capabilities, which is where an individual has a primary functional area of expertise, software development or coaching or Scrum mastery, and a broad set of complementary skills or competencies. And this is individual, which was just, you have one set of skills, you have your complementary skills are irrelevant to the job, right? Companies since the 70s, 80s, 90s have shifted more, well, 80s, 90s have really shifted into this idea of we want these complementary skill sets alongside this primary functional skill that is your job description. But what has emerged through what we've been looking at is the idea of broadly what we're calling pie-shaped professionals, or I've also heard people call these M-shaped or cone-shaped. This shift of expectation where individuals are expected to have two or more primary functional areas of expertise. They want a delivery lead with Scrum Master skills, deep expertise. They want a Scrum Master with deep technical skills. They want a manager with deep coaching skills. And what came up a lot is this idea of and. It existed across more than 50% of the job descriptions that we were looking for. And to make it even more interesting, the combination of skills was not common, was not standard. I can't tell you which two skills were the most common together. There were some, like delivery leads with Scrum Master skills or Scrum Masters with tech skills. Those were fairly common. But it's almost as though these hundreds of organizations, it didn't matter what 2 skills or 3 skills someone brought into the job description, that they brought into the job, as long as you brought more than one. And when we looked at what hiring managers were doing, one of the other things to be absolutely clear about is some of these skills weren't in the job descriptions. Some of these skills were what hiring managers were recruiting for, right, or looking for in the interviews, rather than necessarily having them explicitly listed in the job descriptions. Now, some did, obviously, but others did not. So bear in mind that there is a distinction between what is asked for and what is looked for. And it's a bit frustrating sometimes because it's difficult for someone who's looking for a job to necessarily know what they should be focusing on or emphasizing. And that's also, I think, partly where skills in communication and skills in the interpersonal skills are so important, because they're going to help you understand more so than perhaps the job description might do in the first place. Again, for the individuals and the professionals, the good news for you is that organizations in general found it very hard to find someone with all of the skills. Right? They could find people with one skill or one functional area, but they were finding it really difficult to get the people who had all the skills necessary for the job. And so we look at the employment market, and there's this really weird contradiction that exists where there's a lot of people on the market, but also a lot of jobs on the market. And part of it is this gap between the skills that people have, the singular skills that people have, and the multidisciplinary skills that people are looking for. And Rogerio's point is that there is actually a reverse ageism that is happening here as well, where experience, which comes from experience, and so there does have to be that awareness. Now, I'm not going to get into ageism because there are separate issues around that, but just be aware that the expectation of companies is they're looking for people, they're hiring people with multiple primary functional capabilities. Now, if we're going to talk about agile skills or agile related skills, the demand over the last 12 months has increased. The expectation is the majority of the organization is going to work using agile related skills. And so the expectation and the demand for agility is increasing. The expectation, like I've said multiple times, everyone should have agile acumen. They're hiring people who can work with agility in agile ways. They're looking for mindset and they're looking for agility. Does that mean they're specifically looking for Scrum or agile skills? Agile frameworks? No, not necessarily. The demand and the expectation of that is not as great as it was several years ago. What they are, however, going is we need people who can work with agility. The market is ambiguous and dynamic. The expectations of our customers keep evolving. We need agility, right, if we're going to survive. And that has become a fairly strong statement across all of the functions, all of the organizations that, well, not all, almost all of the organizations that took part. So let me actually get to the money slide. So what skills are in demand? So like I said earlier at the beginning, we've split these into functional skills and into functional skills and into human skills. Of no surprise to anyone, communication skills is number one. It's number one in most studies that I've seen, the World Economic Forums, the OECD studies and so forth. They all talk about the importance of communication skills. Now, what was interesting here is communication skills were asked for in a lot of organizations, but there were also a lot of organizations who were looking for good communication skills, but they didn't explicitly ask for it in the job description. That's those orange components here. Technical skills was number two. Now there were something like 30 or 35 distinct technical skills that organizations were looking for. Software development, data, like artificial intelligence. We have, for the purposes of this report, consolidated these into a singular line, which is technical skills, because which technical skills were needed differed based on the organization, the industry, and the products being developed. And because one organization wanted Java and another organization wanted AI, they're still needing people with those deep technical expertise. Now, what has emerged a lot is the expectation of, let's take Scrum Masters as an example. I'm sure everyone here, almost everyone here probably has their Scrum Master certification. And a lot of you probably are Scrum Masters or have been Scrum Masters. What we have seen is a shift in demand, where it used to be we need dedicated Scrum Masters. Now what's emerging is a lot of companies are starting to ask for Scrum Masters with technical skills or delivery leads with Scrum Master skills. So this idea of a highly specialist Scrum Master is still in demand, actually still is highly in demand, but what complementary skills are being recruited for is shifting. And so someone who has just Scrum Master expertise without technical skills is not going to be as competitive, or in fact, won't be competitive at all, because of this expectation of these these multidisciplinary skill sets. The second and third skill sets that are sought after: teamwork and collaboration, and we saw that flow through the chat quite a number of times, and attitude and behaviors. Now, this one's a little bit of an interesting case. We had a lot of questioning around what is a mindset, what is mindset's a skill, are attitudes a skill? And they're not, but they can be taught and they can be learnt and they can be changed. So we ended up including them here as something that, whilst they're not nominally a skill set, they are something that companies are looking for. They're looking for people with particular behaviors, particular attitudes, particular mindsets, and these are things that can be developed. Now, Agile acumen, we spoke about the expectation that that any person in the organization can and does work in an Agile way. Below this, problem solving, critical thinking, tools and software. And I know a lot of the people were complaining about Jira in the chat. So this is where this fits in. Companies, 27% of organizations are looking for people who can use and set up and lead and do something with these Agile tools. It's a skill set that is expected and demanded. There's more. I'm not going to go into them. You can read through this yourself. I want to end on one key piece of information and then open up into Q&A. So when we look at the distinction between roles and skills, What is on the screen now is role, not skill. There are skills within these roles. Scrum Masters, product owners, project managers, which surprised me, even business analysts, which surprised me, continue to be in high demand. Organizations are saying it is hard for them to recruit the Scrum Masters, the product owners, the BAs that they need with the combination of skill sets that they need. Again, remember, we're talking about the importance of and. Right? The fact that there's a lot of Scrum Masters in the market, the fact that organizations are struggling to hire Scrum Masters is because they're looking for Scrum Masters with complementary skills, Scrum Mastery and technology, and sometimes specific technology stacks. The market is okay in terms of management skills. There's enough managers to fill the market need. The market is also okay with things like program managers, DevOps engineers, product managers. There's not a huge demand for them in a lot of organizations, but the organizations that are looking for them seem to have reporting that they can find these roles relatively well. The ones that I'm really sorry to say, there is very strong evidence that the supply is exceeding the demand, are those specialist roles around Agile coaches, transformation leads, and enterprise coaches. That's not to say that organizations are not looking for coaching skill. The expectation is that individuals have coaching skills, but they're looking for those coaching skills in other roles, like Scrum Masters or product owners or managers. Managers was actually a very strong one, where the expectation is we want managers who can coach. Right? We want Scrum Masters who can coach. We want tech leads and business leads who have coaching skills, who can take the coaching stance, to use Lisa Atkins' terminology. So this is very much a shift in the market. I will be very honest here and say this is a singular data point. And what we need to see is what trends happen in the next 12 months as to whether we are talking an anomaly or we are talking a different or a new trend. I think it's a new trend, right? But that is an opinion rather than something that the data says, because we just have the one dot point. So I want to pause there and open up for Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Evan, for that presentation. I feel like between conversations with you, being in different places, having heard a lot about the report, I still learn more every single time. So I think between watching the chat and some of the questions popping up in QA, the question I want to dive into first is, what is the difference between searching for a pie-shaped professional versus searching for one person to do two jobs? And I'm going to add a little bit onto that. And how can people detect that, and how can they avoid that? How can they find that balance?
So you just broke up for a second. Can you just repeat that? How do people?
Oh, of course. So what is the difference between searching for a pie-shaped professional versus searching for one person to do two jobs?
Oh, okay. So there's a part of me that feels some level of stress here, because I do worry that organizations are expecting too much from people. And there's almost this shift where companies are being cheap. Like, I could hire two, or I could just get one person with both skills. And I want to make a distinction between cheap organizations and organizations that are taking advantage of their workforce, and those organizations where they're building these cross-functional multidisciplinary teams where there is true collaboration. So the distinction is, someone with multiple skill sets is not the same as someone doing multiple jobs inside the organization. They should be bringing those multiple skill sets together, right, in order to achieve an outcome for the customer, rather than like two distinct roles in the organizations. And which combination, to be honest, I think is as much a factor of what drives you as an individual, where your passion lies, where your interest lies, as it is what the market demands. Because there's no point in investing in multiple skill sets if you're bored of all of them. Right? Find the ones that you're passionate about, and then find the way that they connect, that links to what companies are looking for. But just be very mindful in those job interviews and when you're putting in job applications, that you're highlighting what skills, multiple, that you have and how they integrate together. I think that's the key distinction between a company that's just being cheap.
All right. And then another question that came in is there really a question between bad versus good Agile, or is there still a matter of packaging Agile into a format that is easier for organizations to accept, i.e. less of a shift from how they're comfortable doing things?
That's a tough one, because I'm going to be stepping on some heartfelt beliefs from some of the people in this audience. I think we need to start talking about agility, not agile. And I believe it is possible for an organization to do agile badly, but still be agile. I believe it's possible to have a mindset, even if the practices aren't well established or the systems of the organizations don't support it. I also, however, don't believe that that's necessarily sustainable. And one of the things that we see in a lot of organizations is where the behaviors that are expected of individuals are running 2 or 3 years ahead of the governance systems that they operate within. And the example I always use is of collaboration. We want to encourage collaboration behaviors, collaborative behaviors. We want to build the willingness to share and to act in the customer's best interest rather than necessarily your functional silo's best interest. And that works all well and good until it's October or November and it's performance management time, and suddenly I've got to put everyone on a bell curve, and Laura gets a 3 and Molly gets a 2 because I don't have enough 3s to give out, because that's what the system, the governance system, exists within the organization. And so the systems often detract from agility, but I think we need to we have to recognize that companies are just expecting agility now. They're expecting people to have that agile acumen. We need to figure out how to operate in the market that we exist within, rather than try and assume the market will behave the way that we want it to, because companies are going to do what companies are going to do.
All right, so there's 2 questions that are kind of along a similar theme, so I'm going to ask one, but I think it'll touch on both. So for people who have worked as Scrum Masters and really have a deep skill set there, but they don't necessarily have the deep technical skill sets that are now being demanded, what's your advice on what people should do in those positions? Should they invest in learning coding, or is there a different way they can develop that pie-shaped skill set?
So it's a good question. Learning those technical skills has value in its own right, but it's also a very significant investment of time and effort and energy to get to a level of competence there. I would suggest 1 or 2 things. One is, if it's an area that you're interested in, absolutely. You're not trying to be a software developer, but you're going to be in a leadership role, servant leadership role of software developers. So understanding the technology, being able to support them, like leading from the front, right? This is going to be important to you. But I'd also note that there is demand and opportunity for Scrum Mastery in multiple different domains and areas: marketing, business operations. There's also, so it doesn't have to be technology skills. It can be other functional areas of expertise. I'll just use marketing as an example. The other thing to note that I would add is there's also a potential here of creating, it doesn't have to be pie-shaped with technology. It can be around, you're really good at conflict resolution. You've gone through conflict resolution, education and training, you've got some experience there. So that you're able, again, you work in a different way, you bring these skill sets together. So if you're a deep specialist Scrum Master, especially if you're currently happily employed, now is the perfect time to build up a second skill set, a second competence, maybe even a third, in an area that interests you, that is going to make you much more well-rounded in terms of capabilities, so that the next job, right, you're entering into in a much stronger position in terms of negotiation and in terms of the actual what companies are looking for. It doesn't have to just be those technical skills. That just happens to be the most common, right? Scrum Mastery and tech skills. They are the most common expected together, but that doesn't mean it's the only one.
All right, we are nearing the end of our time, so I think we'll do one more question, and then for everybody else who has thrown amazing questions into this Q&A box, I will work with Evan to make sure that your questions get answered. But I think the kind of final question I'm going to ask, so, and it's of course now lost in the Q&A box. How do you recommend people demonstrate their pie-shaped skill sets, whether that's in a resume interview? How do you recommend people really showcase they've developed pie-shaped skills?
So that's a tricky question. There's a challenge to that question because different organizations are expecting you to show up in different ways. And I think one of the common recommendations is there has to be a level of tailoring of yourself and your offering to an organization when you're going for a job. Ultimately, you have to be able to demonstrate how you are going to help them solve a problem, solve their pain. And by highlighting, I bring this and this and this, right? The skills are good, but what's most important is for you to go, I bring this and this and this, and that's going to help you solve this problem in this way, or because of this. So you've got to tie your skills to their outcomes. If you can do that, you're going to get the job.
So let's dive in. So one of the questions, I understood from key findings that demands of human skills are increasing more than functional skills. On the other hand, companies have difficulty in finding individuals who have technical skills. Are there any contradictions between them? How does that work? Or what's kind of your interpretation of that?
So demand is increasing, which is not the same as saying it's hard to find. So they're finding difficulty in finding people with the right mix of technical skills. And with technical skills, it really was a mix. So they could find a software developer, but they wanted someone who had skills in DevOps and software engineering, or Scrum Mastery and software development. Right? So they're looking for that mix of skills. But in the technical, if we just focus on technical skills, it was hard to find, or organizations are finding it difficult to find the right mix. Whilst at the same time, the demand for those soft skills were increasing, but they're able to find those soft skills. People are demonstrating them, maybe not in every degree, and certainly there are some poor examples out there, but the soft skills, sorry, I'm falling into my own trap. The human skills that organizations are are looking for, are being found in the people who they're recruiting or they're looking for.
And I think this next question really touches on such a hot topic these days. How do you see AI impacting needed skills?
So that's a tough one to answer, in part because AI, like I said at the very beginning, AI did not come out as a strongly in-demand special, like specific skill set. I think it was like 1.8% of organizations were specifically looking for AI as a core or a common skill set. AI was emerging in like specialized roles, like in innovation teams and so forth. They were hiring AI specialists. To date, at this point in time, or more, well, 6 months ago, 4 months ago, when we did the analysis, because time is moving very quickly in the AI world, AI was not an in-demand skill set across the board. It was still highly specialized in specialized areas with a few 1.8% of companies as an exception. Now, my opinion, right, and this is just Evan's opinion, is that AI is going to be we've been through major automation disruption before, but this is the first time I think white collar workers, knowledge workers, are truly being disrupted. It's always been physical workers, blue collar workers who have been disrupted in the past. I think part of the fear and uncertainty is this is the first time knowledge workers are being disrupted, and we don't quite know what that looks like. But realistically, again, Evan's opinion, we do know what it looks like because we've gone through these disruptions multiple times over the last 100 years. I think we just need to learn from the other disruptions and see how that may play out here. Like all of the other disruptions, some jobs go away, other jobs come up. And in fact, I actually had a conversation about this about 3 hours ago. And one of the questions that was raised was literally this same question. And what sort of came about in that conversation is thinking about artificial intelligence and generative AI specifically as an enabler for growth, job growth, and getting rid of the simpler knowledge work. And a long time ago, like 8 years ago, I used to be a consultant, and we'd be paid a lot of money to build very basic PowerPoint decks effectively. And that kind of thing is going to go away. And that's not a bad thing, right? But it means that those who can pivot and adapt as individuals, they may not have that job anymore, but the skills that they bring and the complementary skills and everything else is going to open up new opportunities. So some individuals, like any major disruption, some individuals will lose out and be unable to adapt. But as an industry, as a global economy, things are going to be like there's going to be more than there was before. Again, that's Evan's opinion. There's no data in what I just said.
Amazing. So I think we have time for one more question before we wrap up. And I am liking this question about, do you see any demand for change or change management skill sets? Feels really important in today's ever-changing world of work.
So yes. Now, one of the things so when we actually went through this, change management, so change managers as a role was listed, and I think we grouped them in with transformation. We grouped them in with, I think it was like transformation leaders or something like that. I forget. I have to go back through and see how they were grouped. But change managers were there, not as a huge number, but change managers as a role was there. Change management as a skill was listed, but not as often as things like coaching skills. So I do think change management as a skill set is necessary. I think companies are looking for it, but I think they've buried it within other skill sets and in other responsibilities. And I think that's going to, and again, Evan's opinion, I think that will shift. And I actually think we'll see a greater discussion around change management as a skill set as separate to agile transformation. as the world sort of reshuffles into whatever the new world order looks like.